Hello, everybody, and welcome to Outraised Voices. I'm your host, Sharon Lee Williams. I'm so glad you're here, as always. If you've been here before, thank you for showing up. Thank you for being part of our community. I appreciate you. And if you are new here, thank you so much for joining us. And today we're going to be talking about transracial adoption. We're going to be talking about racial identity. And with our CEO guest today, Judith Alexis Craig, we are also going to be talking about the importance of names, of naming. What is that identity? What does that mean? She's going to tell us all about that. Now, Judith is going to talk about the challenges and also benefits of being a transracial adoptee. And she works with families who are navigating this situation, not only just transracial, but in all levels of adoption. She works as a consultant, a therapist. She's been social worker. I wonder, is that it? I know she's working on a program as well. So I asked Judith what she would like to be called when we had our interview earlier, and Judith Alexis Craig, and she said, Jude. So what do you think I'm going to open with? Obviously, hey, Jude. Hey, Jude.
Hey.
Again.
How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for being brave and showing up and doing all that. It's really helpful to have our CEOs here, you do bring conversation, education, and outreach, and we all need to talk about these things. Yeah. We need voices of knowledge, experience, journeys who have been here. So, as a transracial adoptee, my first question to you, coming from a place, I understand what it is, but I'd like our viewers, our audience to understand what is transracial adoption, how do we get there, what's the journey with that for both the adoptee and the adoption family who is adopting.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question because we use a lot of words and terminologies and we don't always break them down, just assuming people understand what it all means. So to start off with, thank you for having me, of course. Happy to be here and to share. When it comes to transracial adoption, what that term transracial means is that the adopted person and the adopting family are of different racial ethnicities. So in my case, for example, as a Black child, which I was when I was adopted, of course, a Black baby, I was adopted into a white family. So my parents are Anglophone. They were residing in Quebec at the time, but they're white. Sort of their background is Ukrainian, American, and Scottish. And I, as a Haitian-born African descendant, joined their family. So it can be any racial differences between the child and the adopting family. Of course, then you can also have sort of multiracial families if you're adopting from multiple different countries. That would still be considered transracial. And then I should just mention transcultural adoption is when there's, say, as a ethnicity race match, but culturally they're different. So, for example, adopting a child from Africa when you're a Caribbean person, Caribbean-born descendant, most directly, for example, that would be a transcultural adoption. So there's a couple of two new words for folks to be able to mull over a little bit.
Yeah. So when we say transnational, where does that? Is that part of the transcultural or? What is
yes, so the transnational part is that I was adopted overseas, so international adoption. So I was born in Haiti, and as a baby, I traveled from Haiti to Canada to meet with my family, and I was adopted. So that's where the sort of inter-country or transnational part comes into it. So again, some interchangeable words there to describe it, but that's just about adopting a child from a different country. It does mean, too, that, say, racially, I could have matched my parents. So if I had been adopted, I could still be a transnational adoptee, but same race. So it just means from abroad, any country abroad.
Right. Thank you for that. So what is the procedure? You have a family in Quebec, say, we want to adopt a child from Haiti? Is that the first
Yes, the process is
step?
really quite it is quite a complex process to do adoption. So when I was
Mm-hmm.
adopted, God, 40 plus years ago, I'm now in my mid 40s, the process was very different in a lot of ways. Adoptions happened a lot faster back then. Now there is a considerable processing period. You start by contacting your local Children's Aid Society, or you can get in touch with a private adoption agency if you know already that you want to go that way. But the process
Mm-hmm.
is an information session is always starting off so people understand fully the process of adoption. Then comes a training portion, which is PRIDE. It's the training acronym that all adoptive parents, whether you're doing domestic, so here within Canada, intercountry, outside of the country, or privately, domestically here in Canada, everybody has to take this training course. It gives that foundation for adoption, and it covers a lot of the core complexities within adoption, such as loss, grief, these types of things. So it's quite an in-depth program. It's about 27 hours. So you do that over a series of weekends or weeknights, depending on the individual agency. And once you've gone through the PRIDE training program, so you take that, you're now certified, you then have to undergo what's called a home study. So again, that would be carried out by a licensed practitioner, either through your local Children's Aid Society or through a private adoption agency or adoption agency that is supporting you internationally. So there's a list of practitioners that you could contact. You would reach out, find the one you want to work with, and then through a series of interviews with yourself, if you have a partner, any children you have, people that are in your life, your community, over several weeks, they will come, they'll do the interview, and they'll put together a report, which becomes your home study. And now with that document and your PRIDE training certificate, you're then considered adopt ready. So I should just mention that adoption report part has many different layers to it. So it's getting police checks for vulnerable safety children, you have a medical examination, etc. So that process usually takes about 6 months or more. So sort of with the PRIDE training and then the home study, you're looking at at least a year, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. Just depends again on availability of workers and what you need to do to gather all of the information that's required as well. So it's quite a lengthy process to start the journey of adoption.
So to start the journey, this is before you get to meet this child. Now, I'm always curious. So your parents, they pass this rigorous test, and it should be. And I would say, and I'm only going to say this because when you were going through adoption, Haiti they wanted to get children adopted, so out of Haiti, and to have a different life. So was the process, do you think, was that shorter because they wanted to get these children out? Did they get the children out and then the process begins from wherever they land, or how did that work?
So it is that you have to go through this process first. So in Haiti, I was living in an orphanage during this time, and in some countries, different countries have different sort of systems and how they're set up. So some have sort of children's homes or orphanages. Some have foster home situations. We know that institutionalized living is not helpful or good for anybody. So more of a foster home environment is a preferred method, but not all countries have that. So as much as, yes, there were quite a few children. I flew on a plane probably with about 20 other children who were being adopted at the time.
Wow.
Now, the process then was that we actually were taken to Canada by some staff. We were not picked up by our parents. So now for adoption, it's mandatory, which I think is excellent, so incredibly important. Parents have to travel to their children, like whether their children is residing, their country of origin, and they have to sometimes spend several weeks there, but they're bonding, they're building a relationship with the child before they bring the child back to Canada.
Understanding the culture, understanding the culture a little bit.
Exactly.
So when you came back with workers from Haiti or Canadian?
So they
Did they
were a
come and
mix of them. It was actually quite unique
oh,
because for our process, I was actually being filmed along with some other Haitian adoptees for a Canadian film board. So I was actually on the sound. I believe I was on the lap of the sound person for that. So yes, they had, I believe, some staff from the orphanage and those who worked at the adoption agency in Canada. And
yeah.
then this film crew happened to be there as well, so they sort of helped out and held us babies as well. So quite a unique way of coming. As I say, this was back in
Wow.
the early 19. This would have been January of 1980. So things have changed
Right.
dramatically for the
Right.
better when it comes to
And
that
how
part.
old were you? Well, if you were held on the lap, you're a baby.
Yeah, I was
Being
just shy of 4 months. I was very, very little. Nowadays, generally speaking, the adoption wait time is anywhere from approximately 2 years plus, right? So there's a lot of, so there's sort of the portion that's done here in Canada with individual. As soon as you add in the international element, there's work that has to happen in that country of origin as well. And different countries have different processes. So often that can be the holding zone. You can actually be waiting for quite an extended period of time, often. But yeah, so generally now children who are coming are not as young as I would have been. They're going to be older, maybe a year plus years old. Most often now, you very rarely have really little babies coming and being placed for adoption.
And you feel that's a better process to actually, yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking if you're coming as a 2-year-old, what is the, I'm thinking, what do you know? You get on the plane, it's a little bit shocking because now you're more aware. As a baby, you're just like, just hold me, somebody hold me, even though you're like that at 2 years old, but now you're more aware. So how does that happen when you bring we'll say Haiti, you bring this 2-year-old and he or she comes to Canada and meets these new faces, but you said, oh, well, I'm thinking aloud because now you can't really go to Haiti and spend time there. So how does that process work?
So the process most recently, because unfortunately Haiti is going through a period of unrest, which is devastating, of course, there have had to be some unique situations, I guess I would say, in terms of having children come over to Canada. There have been different private arrangements made through helicopter, I know, airplanes. So having different ways of getting children out of the country as swiftly and safely as possible is definitely been more of a challenge now that they've been going through this period of unrest. Whenever that happens in a country, they will generally try and get those children who are already identified for adoption will usually be able to leave the country. However, any new adoptions often are put on pause. So somebody was in the middle of the process of looking to adopt and there's political unrest or, for example, civil war were to break out or a natural disaster. Generally speaking, during those acute periods, adoptions would be paused because often what happens is children sometimes who are not actually orphaned or in need of a new family can get swept up in that, right? If there's a natural disaster, say, you have to take time to look for those relatives, opposed to just assuming this child now needs to be adopted. So it's really important that countries, when these matters happen, that adoptions put on pause, and there's a rigorous process that's undertaken to ensure only the children who truly need to be adopted are being adopted, so that's such an important part of the process, and ensuring that adoption is being done legally and above board, because unfortunately there is there's a negative side to it as well, where people will traffic children. That does happen, and it's often something that we don't like to talk about or hear about or think, oh my God, that's horrible, but it is a reality, unfortunately, and that does occur. So we have to have a lot of mindfulness and the right processes being carried out on both ends here in Canada and then in the country of origin for the child as well.
I just not love what's happening, but certainly the information. I appreciate the information.
Yeah, of course.
Now, what happens when a child is brought over from any country, and doesn't bond, or the family doesn't bond with the child.
Yes, that's always very, very difficult. The goal now with intercountry adoption and domestic adoption as well, so here within the country of Canada, is a bigger process leading up to the child coming to move in with you. So, for example, with intercountry, that's why parents have to travel to the country of origin and often stay there for several weeks. So they're able to do that, a handover really successfully, a handover that's going to be in the best interest of the child. So that would be the family starting by visiting where the child is living, child's home, orphanage, foster home, and getting to know the child. So building that relationship and rapport, understanding what their schedule is, the things they like, the things they don't like. So they really are understanding who this child is, so that when that transition happens, the goal is that it's as smooth as possible. Domestically here in Canada, we do something similar where the child and the prospective adoptive parents will again visit each other multiple times, and the time that they spend together will increase over several weeks usually. So adoption plan is put into place. So it's not just you're adopt ready, here's a child, you've been matched, and that's it. No, we know that for children of any age, they need time to adjust. This is yet another loss for them in their life, right? Losing their caregivers. Even if they're in an institutionalized home, they've had a set amount of caregivers around them. They need time to process and to transition to a new family. It often does take time. There are cases and where it does not work. And unfortunately, there are occasions when a child is the terminology is essentially they are needing to return usually into foster care. Ideally, the foster care home they came out of, if that's available. And the adoption breakdown, it's often referred to as, or disillusionment does happen. Dissolving, does happen on occasion. It's actually probably more often than people are aware of. If there are some challenges that become too big, or there's not that appropriate bonding. What I should say,
or I'm guessing, sorry to interrupt, but I'm guessing, let's say you have a family, two partners who split up, during this process, and so now we don't have. Is there a reintroduction and a retraining with all of that? I mean, how does that?
It's really difficult when this happens. I mean, for absolutely everybody, but most certainly the child, right? The child who's been promised this, we use the term often forever family. And when that doesn't happen, it definitely has a huge impact on the child. Best course of action is to support the child as fully as possible. As I say, try and get them back into the same foster home so they at least have that familiarity. And then the child social worker's responsibility is to support them, provide them with therapeutic support, and working as well. Then the family will have their own social worker that would have been working with them to support them on their journey. They also would need support. Yes, sometimes
the adoptive
they are
family,
then
right?
rematched with a different child. And the child is often rematched with a different family. But that often has to take quite a bit of time to process, to heal, to grieve this significant loss that they've had for both parties. Sometimes it's felt that that family, for them, adoption won't be part of their journey any longer, and they move forward with their life. But they always will work very hard. All of the workers will work together to try and avoid that as much as possible. Or a breakdown, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And sometimes it is actually in the long run in the child's best interest if that family is not equipped to really manage and support the child to the best of their ability that the child needs. So as horribly hard as it is, there are occasions when it has been in the better interest in the long run. But that in between period when it's very acute is, of course, very difficult for all parties involved. It's a very challenging time. But with support and guidance, people are able to move through that and to be, as I say, reconnected with a new family, which is the ultimate goal for the child, the young person.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the age they're at and how long they've been with the family. All of these factors, I'm sure, play into it. Now, with social worker, are there enough social workers? Well, I guess when you adopted a family, do you have social workers coming in once a month? How does that work?
Yeah, so at the beginning, before the adoption is finalized, there is also that period of time, about 12 weeks is the earliest you can go to have the adoption approved in the court, like through the court system with a judge. So there is that period of time where you're getting a lot of support from your social worker, from the child social worker. They're wanting to make sure everything is going well, that there is attaching and bonding happening, and that the child's needs are being met. So during that period of time, you will have the coming and goings of social workers. It can feel a little bit whelming at times, but it's really to ensure, again, the best needs and interests of the child are being met. Once you go through the legal process and you go to court and the judge signs off and commissions the adoption as approved, you then hold all of the parental responsibility for that child, and you now are making those decisions independently as the parent of that child, and you won't have the visits happening any longer. So that is up until the finalized adoption period. For some people, sometimes there's a longer runway of time. Sometimes it's several months before they finalize the adoption. Often that's the case when there have been perhaps additional challenges or something has risen up within the family dynamic that needs some more support. So that's when they will delay putting it forward to have the finalization until they've worked through any of those big kinks or challenges, because they want to make sure it will be a successful adoption, of course.
Now, as in foster care, do the adoptive parents still get are financially supported as well, like foster care, or?
Somewhat. It's very different. So foster care, folks are being, reimbursed in caring for the needs of a child, from clothing to food, etc. And that's seen as a temporary measure. Foster care is meant to be temporary, right? For most children, they're either going to be reunited home or they're going to be placed for adoption. So foster care is always seen as a temporary measure. For adoption, there can be some grants that parents can apply for. Depends on their income bracket, of course. So all of those needs would be looked at. If the child has a high level of need, so beyond sort of what may be average, then there is often additional support that would come. A package of support may already be in place. That includes some funding for the child. But once a child is placed in an adoptive family's home, that adoptive family does assume all financial responsibility for the child.
Right. Okay, thank you. So let us talk now about Jude. Jude and her journey, Judith and her journey to where you are now, to who you've become. And we'll get to the names because, I love the names when we talked before and what brought you there. But let's get to your journey. You've come from Haiti, you're with this family, and this is your forever family.
Yes, that's right. So I was adopted. So my father was a minister, and he and my mother were married probably about 6 years by the time I joined the family. They had already one biological child, my older sister. She was about almost 3 years old she had just turned 3 years old when I joined the family. And for them, part of their faith, it was important to sort of adopt, to do that calling. Even though they were also able to have biological children, they knew there was a need out there for children. They hadn't been to Haiti themselves, but they had a couple of friends who had adopted from Haiti. So that's how they sort of started learning about Haiti. And as I said, now things have changed, thankfully, where parents have to travel to the country of origin. But at this time, my parents didn't have to. So I came up from Haiti, as I said, flew on this plane, was handed over to my family. And even as a young baby, I think, my God, what a culture shock that would have been. It was January of 1980 that I arrived. So very cold day there. I think for like -40 in that region, like absolutely freezing cold. I'm now seeing a sea of white faces where I was used to predominantly black faces. My family being Anglophones, I wasn't even hearing French very often, which is what would have been familiar to me, and Creole. And so it was a real adjustment period for all of us. How they had parented my older sister was different than how I needed to be parented. So we all went through this adjustment phase and period. And then after about a year of living in Quebec, we actually moved to the States. My father got a new position with a Christian organization there. So we moved to Ohio. Now, again, this is early 80s, and it was still very, very racially segregated in the States during this time. So there was literally sort of the black side of town and the white side of town. And because my parents and my sister, majority of my family were white, we lived, on the white side of town, which meant for me, I didn't have really any interaction with Black folks during this period of time. We were there for about 3 years, I would say. And during this time, my parents had another biological child. So I'm now this little Black girl in between these two little white girls, my sisters. And that definitely started to have a huge impact on my identity. Learning from a very, very young age, around 2 years old, I really didn't like who I saw in the mirror. I didn't want to be Black. I wanted to scratch it off, and I would try and scratch it off when I got really upset and really mad. I wanted a long, pointy nose like my mom and my sisters had. I wanted long blonde hair. I had my little tiny weeny afro. And it was very drastic. I looked so different from everybody that was around me. From my best friends were these two lovely little girls, but I didn't see myself reflected. And that really started to impact. And I refer to that as an identity crisis that I had at a very, very young age, which is heartbreaking, Now,
did you find that your family protected you more, because that becomes a situation they see what's going on, and then you have your sisters who are navigating the world like, okay, so how do they handle it with you and their friends and the conversations out there, or
yeah.
how do
Great
the kids handle
question.
it
I
there?
think for my older sister, she was definitely my protector. We'd be outside playing in the front yard or whatnot, and people would ask that question. I remember being asked, that's a very early memory for me, is, who are you? That can't be your sister. That can't be your mother.
Yes.
That can't be your father. So I was always sort of hit with this, that can't be your family, which does do something to your psyche. I felt like,
Absolutely.
oh, but they are my family. It was almost like I always had to battle for my family to be my family truly. So my sister stood up for me a lot. She would say, she is my sister. And sometimes she'd be like, she's adopted. That's how. And she would tell people, so I'm always very appreciative of that my older sister had, her voice. And I started to find my voice too. And I would tell people I'm adopted. I actually spoke about it a lot when I was a child, more than I probably wanted to, but it felt like I was always sort of explaining whenever we went into a new space, right? That was always such a big part of it. Like, who are you? Why do you have this Black kid here with you? And as we settled into new spaces and people got to know us, that lessened some. I remember when we moved to Toronto after living in the States for a few years, moving to Toronto was life-saving for me because we had a Black neighbor. We had a very multicultural neighborhood. Toronto's very multicultural. We were living, in the Bloor and Christie Gardens area. So it was nice to come to somewhere so multicultural and actually have Black friends. We made friends with a neighbor down the street, this Black American woman. Her children were multiracial, and her daughter and I became like best friends. And within just a couple of weeks of us spending time with them, because she would come over and help my mom unpack, my mom has her hands full with us three girls, I stopped saying I didn't want to be Black. But it was dramatic, the change within 2 weeks of spending time with people who resembled me. And that for me was so poignant, and it stuck with me my whole life. The importance of having children in transracial adoptions, specifically surrounded by their community. So they don't stick out, they don't feel awkward, and they don't feel like they don't belong. It's absolutely imperative. And that's part of the work that I do with families, is helping them to blend that into their everyday life. It shouldn't just be, oh, we're going for, put in a cultural food name once a week. This is about embedding this into your life, because you've taken on this task of adopting a child of a different racial background than yourself. And for that child's mental health, identity, and well-being, they need to be surrounded and involved on a regular basis with people who are from their same cultural background. That's absolutely critical. And that's something that I feel so incredibly strongly about, so that less children have to go through such an extreme identity crisis. Doesn't mean it won't happen at all, because your family can never fully replicate what your cultural, upbringing would have been. But having it embedded in your everyday life is the next best thing, is what I would offer.
So how old were you when this, I guess, transition started to happen, when you started this awareness happened, and say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud.
Yes. It was sort of a bit of a slow transition, I would say. That beginning stage for me was just, and I think that was, part of that was subconscious of me just feeling more comfortable because I was then engaging with Black folks. So I didn't stick out all by myself. My best friend and I, we went from kindergarten to grade 3 together. So I had her, and she had my back. I had her back when I was called the N-word for the first time in kindergarten. That's who I told right away, right? And our mothers ran into that school and dealt with it. So I had that bridge gap for me because I didn't always have my vocabulary. I didn't always know what to say to even protect or defend myself. And it took years, actually, me getting older, going through and living through experiences of prejudiceness, flat out racism, microaggressive behavior, all the things I've heard, and not always fully being able to stand in my power as a Black young woman. That for me really came, I would offer during sort of high school, end of high school into university, when I really started to connect with the Black community on a deeper level. And be that one with fist in the air, like, wow, I really came into this awareness of Blackness in my early 20s, I would say.
I think I won't say that's when I came into mine, but I was certainly around during the movement of dashikis and the Black Power movement, and I remember, and the Afro, and just feeling so wonderful about it because I don't know if I told you, I was born in Montreal. So born and raised in Montreal, going to a Black church, living in a predominantly Jewish community, and going to school, a predominantly white school, and navigating that to a certain degree, although I had other foster sisters with me. So I understand, when you finally get that, it's like feeling, oh, okay. This is fabulous. It's like, and what? People standing with you and, songs. And it was a wonderful, wonderful era. I went from straightening my hair. I was at a job. I straightened my hair. And then I said, I'm not doing this anymore. We left on a Friday, came back on the Monday with my afro and my fork. Yes, they only had forks then. We didn't have any picks. So we had to use your fork. And it was a very interesting time, my job asked me to go and change my hair back because it felt militant to them. So, and this is going back to where am I? How old am I? 75. So going back to whatever it is, the late 60s or something like that.
And as you say that, it reminds me of, stories we heard not all that long ago in the last handful of years. I'm thinking probably mainly in the States, where I remember the stories of young people going to school with their afro or their locks. I used to have locks for many years, and being told that's not an okay hairstyle. And certain schools
or getting it cut, the teacher without permission.
And it's like, what? This is the 2020s. Like, how is that still happening? How are we still being treated like that?
Struggling.
Right? This is our natural way of being. So it really has been a process. Like me now having my low cut, I never would have thought when I was, 13 years old and being horribly teased about looking like, I was called Sinead Judith because my hair was low. I had a little afro, longer than this even, but instead of Sinead O'Connor, and that was so devastating to me.
Oh,
right?
I didn't get that until you said Sinead O'Connor.
There was one boy I remember, of course, the one I had a crush on. He would mock me, and I tried the Jerry curl because I wanted looser curls, and I tried extensions and all sorts of things. And so that journey of really loving myself, it was such a process. It was such a journey well into my 20s, even into my 30s, and now being able to say, I cut it all off earlier this year in the summer, and I feel such a freedom, and that's a part of my continual healing journey. I always say this is a healing journey that truly is a lifetime, because adoption is a lifetime and it impacts you at different points along your journey. And So it's there, but really coming into blackness was so important, and just being made aware on a deeper level, learning about things
Mhm.
through friends from university, going to marches and protests, being involved in the Black Students Association, and eventually becoming the
Mhm.
chairperson of that. Like me, little Black girl adopted to white family, to be a chair of a
Mhm.
Black Student Association is something I never thought I would ever do. But I'm
Mhm.
so grateful for those experiences, because I learned
Yes.
so much, and it was able then to
Mhm.
walk into a room full of Black
Mhm.
people and feel comfortable, because for many years I
Mhm.
didn't. I felt very misplaced and uncomfortable. So the journey, it's been a long journey for sure.
And like
Definitely.
I was thinking, India, Irie, I am not my hair. That's
Yes.
I am not my hair. But all right, so we've come to when you start to date. Now we're getting into the dating
Yeah.
stage and who we have crushes on. Doesn't matter, male, female, whatever it is.
Yeah.
How does that work for you? Are you people open, or to you, or you're open to them, or what? How's that work?
I found dating very difficult. I didn't date actually until after high school, which,
Mm-hmm.
not because I didn't want to. I definitely had crushes all through school. I remember having crushes. I was very committed, monogamous crushes I would have on people for a whole school year. I was very
Wow.
open ethnicity wise. I
Mm-hmm.
would sometimes be yeah, mindful of. I used to think that interracial dating was what would happen for me. I used to have a certain amount of comfortability being in some white spaces at times, and in other ways, very uncomfortable. So it was a mixed bag. I didn't feel fully seen or accepted by everybody. Largely the Black community at my school, for example, when I was in high school, was highly a very high Jamaican population. I didn't dress or sound like or talk like or listen to the same music. So I was sort of that person that was in that in between group where you have people from all different backgrounds come together, and I sort of kept in that lane quite a bit because of my own discomfort and being called often. I was called out, right? I was very preppy, was my style. I was called an Oreo, so Black on the outside, but gee, she sure acts white. So it was
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to actually date, because I didn't feel that a lot of people understood me, because I didn't fully understand me. And so I wasn't really, I didn't have a lineup down the street. I'll put it that way, right? So for
Mm-hmm.
me, I became aware later in life. Although those few people who had maybe little crushes, and I definitely had crushes, but it never went farther than that until after university. Sorry, after high school, and I moved back to Toronto. So we were living in the suburbs at this point. I moved back to the city because I'm a city girl at heart, and living sort of in the downtown area. I started dating, and I think as I became more comfortable and confident in who I was as a Black woman, that definitely increased my confidence to portray myself, right, and put
Mm-hmm.
myself sort of out there and forward. So I did start dating, and it was a mixed bag, different ethnicities and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But so
Mm-hmm.
that came later in life for me. But it
Mm-hmm.
was a definitely it's been a journey. It's definitely been a journey
Mm-hmm.
that's often been very difficult and challenging. And I haven't always known my own self-worth. So I've unfortunately been
Right.
in a couple of very unhealthy and toxic and abusive
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And so I've had to go through that whole journey of really learning to love myself before I could
Mm-hmm.
allow a healthy partner to come into my life.
I think it's not only, well, as you know, it's not just the journey of being an adoptee. I think
Yeah,
it's a woman's journey
definitely.
to go through a lot of this. But um, and your journey, of course, has led you to help so many people who would have, you didn't want to, nobody wants to experience it at the time, but you've made a positive impact and on other people now, on other families and other youth who are going through that. Now let's talk about the biological parents. Have you
Mhm.
had a chance to meet them, or what's the situation there?
Yes, so I grew up as a foundling, another word to dissect a little bit. So, foundling is truly just a child who has been found. Often it's a police station, fire station, hospital doorstep, etc. I was found roadside. So when I was found, I was then taken to the hospital. And so as a foundling, I had no information on me. I had no name. I had no identifying information. I literally had nothing. So that was always really difficult for me growing up. I don't know my real date of birth. I was just given one. I didn't have sort of any pictures or any information about my biological roots or biological family. And I always wanted to know more. You know, I had a brother, so my family did go on to adopt again from Haiti, and they adopted a boy who had an album, who had pictures and a story and history. He was also older adoptee, so he was 4 when he came to us. But I longed for that so desperately. And my parents tried to get some of their missionary friends to look back in the early 80s. Nobody could find anything. I went back to Haiti myself in 2007. I went with a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and we actually documented my journey going to Haiti and literally looking for any biological family. So the film is called Adopted ID, and it followed. We were there for a month, and I was so passionate about finding my family. So I put myself out there into their media. I was on the newspaper, radio, TV. People were so welcoming and supportive and encouraging. However, it was devastating that on that trip, I didn't find my birth family through all their efforts and all of the families that came forward to claim me, thinking I could be their lost child. Often what happens with international or intercountry adoption, which is so disheartening, is there is a loss, right? There is a disconnect. And so a lot of families don't know what's happened, where their child is even living, who they're living with. They end up their whole life wondering these things. And that to me is so heartbreaking. It doesn't have to be that way. You know, now here in North America, we're really focused on openness within adoption. So that includes first birth family, right? And I think that's the way adoption should be. Wherever it's safe for the child to have those connections. One of my, a trainer once put it to me this way. It shouldn't be about loss. It should be about gains, right? Not subtraction, but addition. So that's really important. But for intercountry adoptees, especially as a foundling, I had none of that. So I actually had to wait another 10 years till 2017, when the DNA testing that we now know and are so commonplace practices finally came to fruition. And I sent off my own DNA. And what I got back initially was parts of West Africa, the countries that I originated from, like my ancestors came from, which was so exciting because it was just like, I have a nugget of information. I have something, you know.
Yeah.
And then over a course of several months, I had matches with cousins. And I would be like, oh my goodness, this is great. But for me, not having any names or even location, really, fifth, fourth, third cousin matches weren't helpful for me. Once I got to second cousins, I started to make some headway. But what really sort of sealed the deal for me was in the summer of 2017, I logged on and I had a first cousin match. Then I knew, oh my God, I have found. Because of the first cousin match, I will now know directly who my parents are. And through sort of several conversations back and forth, what we found out was that that side that I'd found was my paternal side. And my father, unfortunately, had passed away about 20 years before this. So in the late 90s, he had passed, but he had 7 children. And one of them was living in Montreal. So I went up with my friend who actually made the film with me. We got in the car, but this time I had my 2 children. They had a child. We drove up to Montreal, and I sat in a Haitian restaurant and I swabbed cheeks with this alleged brother. And after 3 long, agonizing days, we got the results back, and it was confirmed that they were indeed my half-siblings. So I was introduced to my Alexis side. So that's where the name Alexis comes from. And I had family in Haiti, the States, and in Canada. The irony was my uncle and aunts who had come up from Haiti in the 70s were living like the city beside where I had come to when I was adopted. So it was quite bittersweet in a lot of ways, sort of finding out these, like they were right there, my birth family, and not knowing that, and then other family left in Haiti. And so it was heartbreaking that I never got to meet my father. I have a picture of him now, so I can see similarities. And I do have some siblings that I look quite similar to as well. So that's been amazing. It's the first time in my life, bar me having my own biological children, which happened before I met my first family,
Mm-hmm.
to have people who looked like me and mannerisms.
Wow.
So within a few
I know the
months,
feeling.
I actually then I went on 2 different sites. And on the other site, I had another first cousin match. So when I opened that,
Oh.
obviously then I knew it was my maternal side. That one's been a little bit more heartbreaking because my maternal mother is, well, my maternal mother, my mother is, my biological mother is still alive. She's residing in the States, so not very far from me at all. But unfortunately, she's chosen not to reunite. So
Mm-hmm.
often that's known as secondary rejection and very
Mm-hmm.
difficult to go through, and really created another healing process that I
Mm-hmm.
had to
Mm-hmm.
experience. What was
Mm-hmm.
lovely was I had her mother was alive. So when I went down to the States to visit with some cousins who had connected with me on my maternal side, which was lovely, I got to meet my grandmother, and she was 104 years old. And I took my 2 girls who were with me at the time, 2 of my 4 children, and she got to meet her great grandchildren. And for me, it was so moving because what I
Mm-hmm.
learned is that she was actually the one who was supposed to care for me. When my mother told
Mm-hmm.
her family, I'm pregnant, she was unmarried. That wasn't the thing to
Mm-hmm.
do in the 70s in Haiti. But her mother said,
Mm-hmm.
bring the child to me and I will care for her. And I never
Mm-hmm.
made it to my grandmother's arms. So being able to
Mm-hmm.
reunite with my grandmother, this would have been 36, I think 36 years after my birth. And she looked at me like she was looking at a ghost. But we had this incredible moment. And due to my very limited Creole and her very limited English, my cousins thankfully were there to translate. And we just hugged on each other and loved on each other. And 10 months later, she passed away the week of my birthday. So it was just such a blessing. And people said, my God, she hung on to meet you. And it does feel like that. I
Yes.
hold that. I receive
Yes.
that because meeting her was at least an extension of my maternal family. And
Right.
I have pictures of my birth mother.
Oh.
I resemble her as well. And my cousins have told me my voice, my intonation, how I speak, how I walk, is
Mm-hmm.
very much after her. So it's very bittersweet to hear that. I'd love to meet
Yeah.
her. I would like to at least look her in the eyes and see her. But at this point in time, I'm honoring her wishes not to have that. So I really have had to back off. I have
I
2
can
brothers. I
see
met
how that
one of them
I can
as
see
well.
how that
So
is I can see how that is still sitting with you.
definitely,
I
yeah.
can, I can see how that is still sitting with you, and I do understand that. And I because I said I wanted to talk about name, but the
Hmm.
naming is important here because you
Yeah.
found your name. You found a lot of things, but you found your name. You don't know. Did you get a date of birth, by the way? Did you, or you didn't?
No, I still don't
Oh,
know
okay.
because only she will know that information.
And
And
she
so she's
wouldn't.
keeping that close to her chest, unfortunately.
Wow, that's interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
there is a hospital actually in Haiti where I didn't know I was actually born in a hospital because my uncle came to pick us up. So my uncle on her side, my maternal side, had seen me as a baby. He was the only one in the family to attest that I actually was existing. And he drove us to the bus stop. And then we took a bus back up north where my mother's side is from. So when I met that uncle, he was like awestruck as well, to actually see me
Wow.
again. So for me, naming was important. So I don't know if she named me. He doesn't have a memory of that. Unfortunately, he has some health issues now, so he doesn't remember. And he doesn't know the exact date all of this would have happened on. Again, I mean, now we're talking 45 years later. So I don't know my birth date. I don't know if I was named at birth. So the names that I have that I do know is so my full name is Judith Jennifer Denise Alexis Augustine Craig. So Judith comes from when I was adopted. My parents gave me that name. Jennifer, my older sister, named me that after her favorite babysitter because she was the only child in the family at the time. My name Denise was actually my first name originally, and that name was given to me by the nun who had power of attorney over me when I was in Haiti and going through the process to be adopted. She named me, I found out years later, after her sister. And then Alexis, my brother on my paternal side, because my father was deceased, as the sort of eldest brother, he stepped up and he invited me to take back our family name of Alexis, which was so, just to me, that was like a sign of I was truly welcomed and loved and accepted into the family. So that was absolutely heartwarming. And then Augustine is on my maternal side. And I don't actually know about my grandfathers on that side. I haven't had that information shared with me yet. But that's sort of where the Augustine comes from, is that maternal side. And then Craig, of course, is my adoptive family surname. So I have a super long name now, but I generally go by Judith Alexis Craig, keep it compact, and Jude to friends and family. So names are very important, you know, and I think when a child has been named, that's something so poignant and so special to keep. And now what the encouragement very strongly is we don't change names. We're not trying to subtract from this child. They've lost enough, right? Add names onto, but honor your child's name, right? As their first name, add on middle names. You're having your last name will be added on there, right? There's different ways you can do that. So it's not about losing. It's about adding to and gaining for the child, because that's so incredibly important. And names are often, they have meaning. And that person, that first parent, that's one gift they've been able to give their child is their name. So it's so important that people keep and honor those names and yes, add to it, right? It doesn't have to be, again, about subtraction here.
Wow. You know, Judith, I know we're coming to the end of our time together, but it has been, you brought so much education to me, understanding, and I say this, people, but I am so proud of you.
Thank you.
I feel so proud of you, and understanding more about your journey and where you are today and how you've reached out and helping people. You are all that. You
Thank
are
you.
all that.
Thank you. I receive.
And I'm
I
sure there's
appreciate
more to
that.
come. Yeah, I'm sure there's more to come. And I know you talked about a workshop, and maybe on another day we'll get to talk about that. And I'd love to
Yeah.
talk about that when that's done. But I thank you. You've given us so much. It's a book. You do know this is a book, right?
Yes, it's
You
in
do
progress.
know.
It's been in progress for many years, but I feel like now
Yes.
I'm at that final chapters coming together. So yes, watch the space.
Look out.
Book to
Yes.
come very
Look out,
soon.
everybody. Look out. Remember her name. Remember her name. Names. Judith Alexis Craig, but there are many more names to this
Yes.
wonderful, wonderful lady. Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you. I really appreciate you being on, and it was wonderful to hear your voice, to have your voice, and
Thank
I'm
you.
sure people watching will just go,
Thank you so much. Yeah.
be
It's
awake.
an absolute pleasure to be here. I will just say very quickly, if I may, I do have a show that I co-host with an auntie of mine called Adoption Dialog. People can find that on YouTube. And we talk about sort of these complexities of adoption from a slightly different and renewed angle as well. And also for adult adopted people who are in Canada, specifically in Ontario, I do also co-facilitate a group for adult adoptees, and they can find us on Facebook. And it's just a nice space to come together with fellow adopted people and really peer support and be there for one another. So such an honor and a privilege to be in service in that way. So just mention those two things.
And we'll put that in at the end of your bio or wherever you'd like us to put it in. But, you know, people will be streaming this and hear you over and over and over again. We love that. We love that power. So, all right. Thank you so much, Judith.
Thank you.
And
appreciate
be
it.
well. Be well. That was Judith Alexis Craig. And that was the voice of Judith Alexis Craig. And I hope for those of you listening, you learned a lot and understood a lot. And what can I say? The power of community, the power of voice. And remember, your voice matters. Your story matters. Your journey matters. We all matter. Take care. And until next time, I'm Sharon Lee Williams. for Outraised Voices.